Mabuhay and welcome back to the channel. As many of you know, I was asked to host the Filipino on the Rise podcast while the creator Crystal Fabella takes a much needed sabbatical. When I first got the invitation from Crystal to host the podcast, I went above and beyond to make sure I didn't disappoint her or her community of loyal listeners. Here's the thing. I went way beyond the call of duty. So far beyond, in fact, that I drove all the way from Phoenix, Arizona to San Francisco to interview Maria in person. That's the episode you saw last week. While I tried to capture my interview with her for both my YouTube channel and the podcast, the stars simply did not align and I just couldn't use the audio from that interview. Despite what felt like a massive failure, I pulled up my big girl pants and did what I had to do. I begged my cousin to do yet another interview with me specifically for the podcast, which is what you'll see and hear in this new episode. I'd like to share with you highlights from my second interview with Maria, the one you can hear in its entirety on the Filipino on the Rise podcast. Link is in the description below. Maria and I talk about the reasons why we're always geared to overachieve, that it's not just something that we learn from our families, but something that drives our immigrant story as Filipinos. And we talk about why it's so hard for us to remember to take a moment for ourselves, how we have to force ourselves to practice the art of play, and to know that what we do is good enough. Now, on to the interview. Yeah, we finally arrived, and it took a minute because I'll start by saying that this is the second time that we're recording together. It really is a great example of how I, as a woman, as a Filipina, as a human being, have this tick to go on overdrive all the time. As I was sharing with you earlier, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because it's I excel and I look amazing on paper and on video. But then I'll go so far as to say, oftentimes I feel like I'm suffering because I'm just exhausted. And so I called you, Maria, and I was like, oh my God, we need to redo this. Can you hop on a call with me right now to do this? And you were so thoughtful about how do we make it more meaningful, deeper, more resonant with with the listeners. Then we started talking about what drives us and what drives us to excel. And then you started to share some really amazing stories with me about where you're at in that journey of giving yourself space to just be.
Well, I was so glad you came up to Northern Cal. I didn't realize you drove all the way here, but it doesn't surprise me now because you still looked amazing and it had so much energy and it was just super fun. I love that you are exploring these topics because really they are, universal topics, but in the context of our identity, how we grew up, the value systems, and then the story behind it, right? The collective history, but also our own history. And yes, so I came to the US when I was 6 years old. So the first generation immigrant and that story and what it took for a first generation Filipino immigrant whose family definitely has a very different set of, cultural norms and expectations than where we grew up. That shapes us, right? And within our family, it's a very driven, family history with leaders and educated professionals. And it's really safe, very safe to achieve and then have a title that's kind of my anchor and that should take me through life. But it really doesn't. At the very core, we're human beings and we really need to kind of identify with ourselves.
For somebody like you who so much of your life has been rewarded for that, to now be at a place where it's okay, I'm going to now reward myself in a very different way. How do you navigate that? How do you go, it's okay to leave that to other people to take care of?
I love your terminology, shedding. It is shedding because we have armors or whatever has been used to represent what we put out there to the world in order for us to survive, to strive, to achieve. And then after a while, it becomes something that actually the masks and the armors and the skins that we put on actually then become the barrier to us truly connecting, right? So when does that happen? How do you realize that that's there? I've been really fortunate because I've had situations where I've actually had to come to those realizations. And I'll just kind of name them, list them, and then I'll tell you what I mean. First is becoming a mother, right? The second is becoming a surgeon, a transplant surgeon, one of the most intense specialties, where you have both the blessing of the amazing connectivity and the immediate gratification of being able to turn babies and families' lives around, with your action. And then on the other side of that, what that means for you to be able to do that, because you almost have to shield yourself from what it really all means. It's life and death. An organ transplant, which is what I did, means somebody else lost their life, often little kids. And then there's a child who then is able to go into adulthood because of it. You're part of that. And then I leave that to go out into the corporate world. And then now leading a $8.5 billion fund that's multi-stakeholder, that deals with business, it deals with policy, it deals with patient advocates and patients and healthcare workers and scientists of the highest caliber. All of those different stages in life, all of those stages have been a learning experience for me. And I've had to shed one armor or, one layer of something each time. And you know what it all comes down to every single time is truly embracing vulnerability, which is Brene Brown was really like one of the most, she captured it so well and explained so much because we don't grow up with that. We grow up with achievement. And so if you think of vulnerability as a weakness, you're like, okay, we're going to overcome that rather than acknowledge it. So that's one thing, is like embracing vulnerability. The second piece is just style. As a surgeon, you have to control everything in order for it to get to the best possible outcome. Everything in the OR, how you coordinate with the anesthesiologist, how your team conducts a transplant, everything is it's like a perfect dance. When you're out in the real world, that doesn't happen. There are random things everywhere. Everybody views things differently. You cannot control a thing. Being a parent, you learn that even more. They will bring you to your knees, right? These kids will bring you to your knees. They are not surgical residents. They don't have to listen to you. So that, so it's just like a different thing. And then again, then the next phase is a president and CEO of a very complex organization, which requires a lot of interaction with leaders across the globe, essentially.
Yeah.
Where there's such mutual respect. And then there's also this idea of how do you also make sure when you get down to the reality of it, it takes every single person you work with to really embrace and buy in and be understood and be heard. So how do you do that in complex organizations, right? So one of the things that I really took away from it is in leadership training and just trying to hone down, I really learned a lot of really important principles. And one of them, again, believe it or not, goes back to vulnerability-based trust. And the first trust that you need to have is yourself, right? I think that's the thing. It's like, yes, we can strive for that. But the bottom line is you have to know that you're good enough. It's good enough to do the podcast by phone, right? Because we can do everything. We can achieve. We can strive. There's a smart side and then there's a healthy side. That's the thing that we really need to pay attention to. And I think one of the things that I realized is nobody else gets in the way of that except you, like yourself. Just knowing it's enough. Why do you just let go and have fun? It seems so trivial and it seems so selfish. And it's like, what is it about us that where we feel like, okay, we'll do that, but we'll have fun because we will do this and this and this to set it up to be fun rather than just having fun.
This is how we have fun. I think you're touching upon something that is intrinsic to the immigrant story.
I don't know whether it was in your series and Crystal's or others, but it was really interesting because there was a Filipina who spoke about enough. We don't always have to be the one in service of everybody else. I'm not there yet. Can only do that when you don't judge yourself, when you become secure with saying, I'm not going to lose everything just because I let my guard down for a period of time. You get conditioned to always do, because when you do things, you're like, okay, that means I'm worth it. That means that I have a place here. And it's not unusual. People feel that way. But I think culturally it's magnified for us because we belong here in this country. We have a place here in this country. And if we're not needed anymore, because we can take the time and it still goes on, what's our worth? I think that's kind of the fear that people have. It's not necessarily all Filipino, but it's magnified the immigration and the assimilation, that whole process. And I think this whole thing that you point out in some of your other conversations is it's passed down. That sense that even if it's not overtly shared, the way that we are brought up, the way we're rewarded, the way we're guided embeds that in our thinking. But you can only be aware of it. But then in terms of what you do for yourself, just realize that you got to take care of yourself, forgive yourself, not beat yourself up. If, yes, there is a missed opportunity, so what? It's not going to define you forever. I think that it's easier said than done, but it's great to at least be aware of it and, to continue the discussions and to continue to learn.
So that's it for this Take 2 interview with my cousin Maria. If you liked it and would like to hear more, head on over to the Filipina on the Rise podcast. Also be sure to give this episode a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot that you're here. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks for watching. Paalam. Goodbye.